Imagine waking up to the sound of your own skull cracking open like a dry walnut in a dark, silent room. This isn't a metaphor used in a cheap horror novel. It isn't a fever dream. It is the very last thing Peter Porco never truly heard. Yet his brain felt every vibration. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway or the window it was echoing from, within the absolute centre of his consciousness, a physical shattering of his reality. It's November 15th, 2004, 2:14 a.m. Bethlehem, New York, a town so quiet that on a night like this, you could almost hear the frost crystallizing on the window panes. Inside a cozy two-story home on Broccoli Drive, Peter Porco, a dedicated and respected court clerk, is dreaming of a peaceful, well-earned retirement. He is a man of order, of law, and of routine. He doesn't hear the floorboard groan under a familiar, heavy weight. He doesn't see the shadow of his own son, Christopher, standing over his bed like a dark god of vengeance. Christopher is clutching a razor-sharp mountaineering axe, his knuckles white with a fury that no one saw coming. The first swing didn't evoke a scream. It evoked a wet, hollow thud. It was the sound of cold steel meeting the warm prefrontal lobe. The axe sliced through the very tissue that makes us human, the part of the brain that calculates logic, feels empathy, and processes the concept of pain. But this is where science begins to fail, and true horror takes root. Peter Porco didn't just survive the next 16 blows, he entered a state of automated hell. What happened next will force you to question everything you believe about the human soul and the terrifying power of habit. When the axe blade first shattered Peter's prefrontal cortex, his humanity, his self, was erased in a microsecond, and yet the biological machine refused to shut down. His heart, a stubborn muscle, continued to pump blood to a brain that was no longer whole. If the first blow was meant to kill, the following 16 were an act of ritualistic dehumanization. The heavy blade pulverized his jawbone, sending teeth spinning across the darkened room like ivory dice. His nasal cavity was collapsed into an unrecognizable mess of cartilage, bone fragments, and thick, dark blood. A hole the size of a man's fist was now carved into his forehead, exposing the pulsating grey matter beneath. Warm cerebrospinal fluid, the clear liquid that cushions your brain, began to leak out, mixing with the blood to soak his pillow in a sickeningly sweet metallic soup. But Peter didn't scream. He couldn't. The neural pathways required to process the signal of agony had been physically severed from his consciousness. He was in a void of sensation. Then, like a macabre clockwork doll, the body moved. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet splashing into a cooling pool of his own blood on the carpet. He fumbled for his glasses on the nightstand, a habit so ingrained it overrode the fact that half of his fingers had been lopped off by his son's blade. The severed digits lay in the shadows, forgotten. With jagged, bloody stumps, Peter smeared the furniture as he pulled himself up. He began a slow, staggering walk across the white carpet, leaving a trail of wet, red footprints and fragments of bone behind him. He felt nothing. He was already a ghost, yet his body was still performing the morning ritual of the living with a terrifying, mindless precision. Hours later, Officer Lucas, the first responder on the scene, stepped through the front door. He had seen crime scenes before, but nothing prepared him for the stench, a thick, overpowering smell of copper and raw meat. Blood wasn't just on the floor, it was painted on the walls in high-velocity patterns, as if someone had used a pressure washer filled with gore. But what truly paralysed him with fear wasn't the carnage in the bedroom, it was the breakfast table. In the middle of this slaughterhouse sat a perfectly placed bowl of cereal. Pita, with his brain exposed to the cold morning air, had walked down the stairs, navigated the kitchen, and prepared his morning meal. But instead of milk, the bowl was filled with a thick, dark slurry of blood and brain matter that had dripped continuously from his shattered skull as he bent over the table. A spoon sat next to the bowl, perfectly aligned. Next to it lay a piece of his own gum tissue, a fragment of his mouth he had tried to chew and then spat out because his jaw could no longer function. Officer Lucas would later say in a voice trembling with disbelief, "It wasn't a man we found footprints for, it was a machine made of meat, driven by the sheer unstoppable momentum of habit." Pita was dead by every medical and logical definition. Yet the reptilian brain, the ancient part of us that controls routine and survival, was still piloting the wreckage of his body. He was performing a domestic play for an audience of one, the killer, who was still in the house. Pita eventually found his way back to the bathroom. He stood before the mirror, perhaps looking for the man he used to be. The reflection staring back wasn't a human face. It was a mass of raw ground steak and shattered bone. Yet the habit of a lifetime was too deep to break. He reached for the shaving cream. Because his jaw muscles were shredded and his skin hung in flaps, the white foam didn't stay on his face. It slid down into the gaping wound in his forehead, mixing with the grey matter of his exposed brain. He picked up his razor. Clink, clink, clink. The sound echoing in that silent, blood-splattered bathroom wasn't the sound of hair being cut. It was the sound of a steel blade scraping against the jagged, exposed edges of a shattered skull. Pita stared into the mirror with his one remaining clouded eye, baring his teeth in a grotesque, involuntary grin as he tried to mimic the motions of a civilized man. He turned on the cold water to rinse. A thick clot of black blood and brain fragments clogged the drain instantly. The sink overflowed, sending a red tide across the floor. But Pita just calmly patted his mutilated face dry with a towel, leaving smears of brain matter on the fabric. He then went to his closet, put on a fresh suit, and tried to button it with his stumps, blood pulsing rhythmically from his wrists with every heartbeat. Before the darkness finally claimed what was left of him, Pita walked to his desk. With the very last ounce of neural energy left in his dying frame, he gripped a pen with his remaining stumps. He signed a check. It was for his son Christopher's college tuition. Fluid from his brain dripped onto the paper, blurring the blue ink, but he didn't stop. He licked the envelope to seal it, tasting his own mortality, yet perhaps smiling in his mind as if he were sending a final gift to a beloved child. The final twist. The witness in the mirror. The most chilling realization came during the forensic sweep of the house. While Pita was shaving and preparing his final breakfast, Christopher was standing right behind him in the shadows of the hallway. Bloody fingerprints belonging to the son were found on the bathroom doorframe. Pita saw his son in the mirror, but his broken brain refused to see a murderer. Instead, it saw the boy he had raised. He reached out to wipe a splash of blood off the mirror, perhaps trying to clean the image of his son. Christopher, watching his father, his victim, acting out this loving, mindless routine with a hole in his head, finally broke. He fled the house in a state of total psychological collapse. Peter Porco finally collapsed by the front door, reaching for the morning newspaper. Is the life you woke up to today real? Or are you, like Peter, just a ghost of habit, acting out a play while the world around you crumbles? This is The Shadow Files. Subscribe if you're sure you're still alive.